Yo, what's going on, guys? It's Houston Sports Talk back another video today, and today I'm going to be doing my NBA Week 2 power rankings as Week 1 of NBA basketball is over. And what does that mean on a Monday? It is time for NBA power rankings. First time I'm doing this season. I know sometimes we'll do a power ranking list before the season starts, and as the season goes on, then they'll keep doing it. The way I do it is a little bit different. I start, the week after the season. I don't like to do power rankings before the season. You have no idea what's going to happen when the season starts. Teams can look different, and it's just a whole another level once the season starts. It's so hard to predict, a preseason ranking. So I don't like preseason rankings. So from now on, every week I'm gonna go from here instead of preseason rankings to now. So it's just So let's get into it. All right, going from 30 to 1. 30, I have the Utah Jazz. I mean, the Utah Jazz haven't looked so great so far. They've only played 2 games, got blown out by Golden State in one of them. Also, the other one was a close loss to Memphis, even though I will say Memphis's starters were on minute restriction. So it hasn't been great for the Utah Jazz so far, but I think it's not surprising. Utah was projected to be one of the worst teams in basketball. The Wizards at 29, this is not surprising at all. The Wizards, I thought, actually looked pretty solid at first in their first game against the Celtics. Competed in the first half, were competing for about the first 2.5, 3 quarters, and then kind of disappeared at the end of the one against Boston. Jordan Poole looked good in that game. That was solid from Washington. Then their next game, they got blown out. So, I mean, Washington's doing what we expected them to do so far. So, at 28, I have the Pistons. Another team that's not surprising, that's struggling. But I'm actually kind of impressed about the Pistons at 0-3. I know they're 0-3. I've been comparing this Pistons team to the Houston Rockets going back all the way since we saw since we saw the Pistons, make their moves in the offseason. Just everything they've done has reminded me of what the Rockets did last year. As a Rockets fan, I saw my Houston Rockets, my favorite team, the Houston Rockets, go from the worst team in basketball, and then you bring in a veteran head coach, you draft someone at the top of the draft who is known for his defensive and rebounding attributes and is not a good shooter at all, and you sign veterans in free agency, you trade for veterans, you're able to bring in veterans to, mix them in with the young guys, and then you try to turn things around. And what did the Rockets do last season to start off? They started off 0-3 to their season last year, but here was the important part, is that the Rockets last year, when they started off 0-3, even though they were 0-3, they were competing in basketball games. I remember their first 3 games. Their first game was a blowout by Orlando, but then, their next couple games, they were competing with Golden State, overtime with New Orleans. And after starting off 0-3, then the Rockets went on to win their next 5 or 6 games. And we saw the Rockets go from a 22-win team to 41 wins by, doing what they did. What did the Pistons do this offseason? They hired a veteran head coach in J.B. Bickerstaff. They drafted a guy in Ron Holland at the top of the draft who is exactly, brings in things exactly like Amen Thompson brought in for the Rockets with the good rebounding and the good defense. Very similar, just as the Rockets did. As I mentioned with the Rockets signing and trading for veterans like Van Vliet and Brooks and Jeff Green and all the other guys they brought in. The Pistons signed Tim Hardaway Jr. He's looked good so far. Tobias Harris was brought in. Malik Beasley was brought in, who's looked good. They brought in other players to mix in with their younger guys. And it's also the fact that even though, yes, they are 0-3, they had been competing with teams, competing with the Celtics. I mean, that's something no one has done so far. The Pistons only lost by 2 points. It was like 2 or 4 points to the Celtics. Meanwhile, the Knicks got blown out by the Celtics. The Wizards got blown out by the Celtics. So the Pistons were actually able to compete with the Celtics. They competed with a very good Pacers team, actually for most of the game against the Pacers, actually was dominating the Pacers most of the game. The Pacers just kind of pulled away in the fourth quarter. Against the Cleveland Cavaliers, who have looked fantastic, they look solid. I think they only lost by 12 against Cleveland, and it was a much closer game than 12 points for most of the game against Cleveland. Another game where Detroit kind of had it. So Detroit is playing good basketball. They are competing with good teams. They are a young team that is now mixed with veterans, just like the Rockets were last year. And I think they're going to slowly start to figure things out. As we're seeing them compete with good teams, I can't wait to see them go up against the bad teams. All right. At 27, I got the Brooklyn Nets. They're 1-2. I mean, the Nets had a great win against Milwaukee yesterday, but that's really been it so far. Brooklyn outside of that hasn't looked too good. But Milwaukee hasn't looked that great either. Milwaukee's 1-2. Their only win is against a Philadelphia 76ers team who's without Paul George and Joel Embiid. So let's be honest, Milwaukee hasn't looked great either. All right. So then we have at 26 the Charlotte Hornets 1-2. Hornets start off solid, beating the Rockets, coming back, but since then they haven't looked great. They lost to the Hawks, and I can't remember their other loss. 25, you have the Blazers 1-2. Started off really bad with a blowout loss to Golden State for Portland. It was a very bad start for Portland. But then it gets a little bit better. Game 2, competing with New Orleans, only lost by like 2 points. Brandon Ingram game-winning shot was the only reason why New Orleans walked out of a win against Portland. And then what happens in a second game between Portland and New Orleans? Portland blows them out. Portland's looked solid. Another young team who's added in nice pieces. Another young team who looked really bad last year, adding in the pieces that can help them get better. And they've looked better so far. Let's see if they can keep it up, though. At 24, I have the Toronto Raptors 1-2. I've been too impressed with the Raptors. I mean, another team that got a win off of the 76ers, and the 76ers team without Embiid and Paul George, so it's not too impressive to me. Raptors are very shorthanded right now, and Scotty Barnes hasn't looked amazing to start off the season. 22, I got the Houston Rockets, my favorite team. Rockets are 1-2. Rockets haven't looked amazing, but it's so early on in the season, 3 games in. They looked great in their first game, in the first half, and a little bit of the third quarter, and then just kind of lost their touch in the second half and lost to Charlotte. Game 2 of the season was actually a really interesting one. The Rockets were getting killed in the first half by the Memphis Grizzlies. Then the second half comes and the Rockets turn things around and they outscore the Grizzlies 31-7 in the third quarter, beat the Grizzlies by 20 points, 128-108. And then last night, or Saturday night, was a different story, playing the San Antonio Spurs on the back-to-back. I was kind of impressed by the Rockets' play. I know they end up losing, but the Rockets were down by 21 points against the San Antonio Spurs. What did they do? They cut that lead down to 1 point. They were able to cut the lead down to 1 and able to compete with the Spurs even though they were just down by 21 points. And they cut that lead down pretty fast as well. Just like that, it was 21 to it went from a 21-point lead for the Spurs all the way to 10, and it didn't take too long at all. It took maybe at the most two and a half minutes for the Rockets to do that. Yeah, I mean, I was impressed with the way the Rockets were able to, come back against the Spurs and come back against the Grizzlies. One of them, they were not able to get the win. The other, they were. But I think it's extremely hard for a team to one night, on the first night of a back-to-back, to have to fight your butts off to get a win against a good, hard-playing Grizzlies team. And then the next night, on the second night of a back-to-back, down 21 points. A lot of teams that are on a second night of a back-to-back down 21 points don't always have the courage to make it a competitive ball game again. But the Rockets did that, and the Rockets had a chance to win the ball game at the end of this one. With a Jalen Green 3, they couldn't do it, and they barely lost this basketball game. So I was impressed. At 21, I have the team that just beat the Rockets, and that's the San Antonio Spurs. The Spurs are 1-1. It was a rough start for the Spurs against the Mavericks, but the Mavericks we've seen have looked really good so far, so it's not that bad. And then they beat my Rockets the other night. At 20, got the Milwaukee Bucks. They're 1-2. The Bucks haven't looked amazing. They lost to the Nets last night. And then they lost to the Bulls. But they did beat the Sixers. Giannis has looked solid. Lillard has looked really good. Some of their players have looked really good, but as a team, not so much. In 19 out of the Pacers, I haven't really been impressed with the Pacers either, 1-2. They beat the Pistons in the first game. A Pistons team who was so young and still trying to figure things out. The Pistons were controlling the game against Indiana. I mean, we could be talking about the Pacers being 0-3 here, because the Pistons were dominating the Pacers. The Pacers were able to come back and get the win, but since then we saw them get blown out by the Knicks. And then yesterday, we saw Philadelphia come back to get a win against Indiana and beat the Pacers in overtime without Joel Embiid and without Paul George. And Indiana was at home, so I've seen disappointing things from the Pacers so far. 18 out of the Atlanta Hawks, they're 2-1. Not going to freak out about the Hawks so far. They look good. Trae Young looks great, but 2 early wins against 2 bad teams. The Hornets and the Nets, not going to freak out. Yesterday they got blown up by a good team in the Thunder. We'll see how the Hawks do around next week or around the next 2 weeks. We'll see how they're doing by then. At 17, I got the Kings 0-2. I know, it's not great to be 0-2, but I look at the 2 teams they played. It's a rough start to the schedule. You got the Lakers who are playing great basketball, and you got the Timberwolves, one of the best defensive teams in the NBA. The Lakers, on the other end, have been one of the best defensive teams in the NBA to start the season as well. I think that the Kings are a good basketball team. They just have had a very hard start to their schedule. And both of their games have been close. Minnesota was down to the wire. Kings had a chance to win the game in that one. Keegan Murray had a chance to win the game with a 3 down 2. And then the game against the Lakers was a very close game. The Lakers only won by 4. So they're competing with these good teams as well. Fair to note. All right, at 16, I got the Miami Heat. Another team's only played 2 games. Most teams have played 3, but there are a couple that have only played 2. Miami was crushed by Orlando in their first game, and then in their second game, they were able to beat Charlotte. Impressive win for Miami, but we'll see. They haven't played enough basketball to really judge them yet. 15, I got the Pelicans. They're 2-1. It was a rough loss against Portland last night. But the Pelicans did start off with 2 nice wins last week, so I think they've looked pretty solid, especially without DeJounte Murray. They got to win against Chicago Game 1, then beat Portland in a close fighting game, and then they obviously lost to Portland. I got the Pelicans at 15. I got the Sixers at 14, 1-2. The Sixers got a good team. We just haven't seen them all together yet. And I did like their overtime win yesterday. At 13, I got the Nuggets at 0-2. I'm not gonna lie. I'm concerned about the Nuggets. Jokic is playing great basketball to start the season. Jamal Murray looks good. Christian Brown even looks good. To me, even though Porter Jr. struggled a little bit, I think their starters have been fine. That is not the problem. I know it's only 2 games in, but that is not the problem for this Denver Nuggets team. There's a serious problem with their bench. Their bench has been terrible in their first 2 games, and I don't know if I see it getting better. There's a problem when the best player off your bench is Russell Westbrook. Dario Saric, Russell Westbrook, Julian Strawther is not going to get the job done. This bench is terrible, and not just the fact that the bench is terrible, but it's also the fact that there's not a lot of good three-point shooting off the bench, and that it showed in the first couple games. They shot 3 for 18 from 3 off the bench in the Clippers game. I think they shot like 0 for 12 or 0 for 13 off the bench from 3 in the Thunder game in their first 2 games. And I don't even think they have 30 bench points to start off the year against OKC and LA. So their bench is very concerning. And I don't know how you can, be a top contender in the Western Conference when you don't have a great bench. Denver didn't have a great bench last year, but Denver's bench was not as bad as it was last year. You had Christian Brown off the bench last year. He provided a big spark off the bench, but you lose him, for the bench this year since KCP is now in Orlando. Now Christian Brown is not coming off the bench anymore. Christian Brown is a starter. Denver is still going to be a good team. Denver's, I think, still going to be a playoff team or maybe just a play-in team. But Denver's not going to be a championship contender with the current bench they have. Denver wants to be serious. They have to make some trades at the trade deadline, if you ask me. All right. 12, I got the Warriors. The Warriors have looked solid to start the year, 2-1. Although, look, it's 2 wins against the Blazers and the Jazz. Let's not freak out. Yesterday they lost to the Clippers. I don't see the Warriors winning their next 2 games against the Pelicans without Stephen Curry, as Curry is expected to be out. So that will be a problem for this Warriors team. And then next, I have the team that beat the Warriors last night. That's the Clippers at 11. The Clippers have looked solid too. They're 2-1. Beat the Nuggets. Lost to the Suns in overtime, but beat the Warriors last night. Harden's looked terrific. He's averaging near a triple-double. It's like 25, 12, and 8 or 7 for Harden that he's averaging. I think another big underrated thing for this Clippers team so far has been Zubac, Ivica Zubac. I mean, he's looked outstanding. I've said many times, and people have argued with this statement, is that with Paul George in Philadelphia now and Kawhi Leonard injured, with those 2 guys not on this team and James Harden on this team and him running the show, and Zubac being, the offense being centered around Harden and Zubac and not being centered around Paul George and Kawhi Leonard and James Harden getting the ball to those guys, Zubac, you could maybe say, is a top 10 center in basketball. In the first 3 games of the season, Zubac is averaging 23 points per game, over 14 rebounds per game, and over 4 assists per game. And he's averaging near 1 steal per game and near 1 block per game. And his field goal percentage is absolutely outstanding at like 56%. And then you also have another guy like Norman Powell, who had a 37-point performance against Denver. I think he had like 18 points last night. He's averaging 20 so far to start out the year. Norman Powell, Zubac, and Harden is the unexpected new big 3 for the Clippers, and it's not that bad. We'll see if this team can keep it up, though. At 10, I had the Orlando Magic. The Orlando Magic have been solid to start out the year, 2-1. We'll see if they can keep it up. I like the addition of KCP. It definitely makes them a better defensive team and a better 3-point shooting team. KCP's been pretty solid so far. And I'm sure he's not done settling in into his new home with Orlando. At 9, I got the team that just beat the Magic to give them their first loss of the season. That's the Memphis Grizzlies, 2-1. This week, the Grizzlies did have a tough lead blown by the Houston Rockets. The Rockets coming back, like I mentioned. But outside of that, the Grizzlies look good, beating the Jazz, beating the Magic. Ja has been limited with his minutes, and a lot of their other players have been limited. Jaren Jackson Jr. just played his first game against Orlando, so he missed the first 2 games of the season. We have not seen the full potential of the Grizzlies yet, because Taylor Jenkins so far has really been kind of limiting their starters. Ja is not getting the minutes that he would normally be getting, and a lot of their starters are getting the same treatment, like Bane and Marcus Smart, Jaren Jackson, of course, all those guys. And Taylor Jenkins has been very, very trustworthy with his bench. At 8, I got the Mavericks. Another team that's only played 2 games. Looked good against the Spurs. Then didn't look so great against the Suns, but it was a road game for the Mavs. Playing good Suns team. I got the Mavs at 8. At 7, I got the Timberwolves, 2-1. The Timberwolves have looked solid. They ended up beating they ended up losing to the Lakers, but then they ended up beating the Kings, and I forgot the other team they beat, but they beat the Kings. That was the Kings. That was Thursday night, and they look solid. Anthony Edwards. Oh, sorry, my bad. It was the Raptors that they beat. They beat the Raptors, crushed the Raptors. So Edwards has looked good. Randall has looked solid. Gobert has looked good, of course, rebounding and defensively. Timberwolves look solid to start off the year. At 6, I had the Phoenix Suns 2-1. It was a tough loss to the Lakers on Friday night, but outside of that, they've looked good. They ended up beating the Mavs their last game, which was a really good win. Start off the season with a great comeback win against the Clippers in overtime. So Suns have looked really good to start off the year. At 5, I got the Knicks. I'm not going to overreact to their first game of the season. Yes, it was a blowout loss, but it was against the Celtics. And then what do they do in their next game right after it? They end up blowing out the Pacers. At 4, I got the Cavaliers. They're 3-0. Cavaliers have been playing some good basketball. I'm impressed with the Cavs, but the one thing I will say, anybody freaking about the Cavs early on, the Cavs have played some bad teams. The Cavs have played the Wizards. They have played the Pistons. And I'm trying to think of that other team that they played. It was another bottom team. I want to say it was Brooklyn. No, I don't think it was Brooklyn. It was. I know they've played Washington and they've played Detroit. I think that other team. It was Toronto. Toronto was their first game. That's my bad. Toronto was their first game of the year. So it's been Toronto, Washington, and Detroit. So Cleveland looks good. I think they're going to be a good team this year, but let's see them get some real competition. We're going to see that tonight against the New York Knicks. All right, at 3, I got the Los Angeles Lakers at 3-0. Here's a team who's 3-0. Unlike just a comparison with the Cavs and the Lakers. I think both are good teams, but the Cavs are 3-0 and have beat 2 bad teams, and the Lakers are 3-0 and have beat 3 great teams. They beat the Timberwolves, they beat the Suns, they beat the Kings. Great start off to the season for the Lakers. Really, in their look, they started off the season by beating the Timberwolves. Didn't even look that good. They shot 16% from 3 against the Timberwolves. LeBron played bad and still won the game because of their defense and because of Anthony Davis's, top, his amazing performance in Game 1. And the Lakers last season would have never won a game against a good team shooting 5 for 30 from 3 and LeBron struggling. It would have never happened with Darvin Ham's leadership and not as good as defense as we've seen before from this Lakers team. I don't think the Lakers would have beat a good team last year shooting 5 for 30 from 3. Usually, most of the time last season, when you see the Lakers play, if you see them beat a good team or you see them competing with a good team, that's because they were shooting good from 3. That didn't happen in the first game of the season against Minnesota. They shot terrible from 3, and LeBron played terrible. But they were able to win because Rui and AD played good basketball, and not only that, but they had good coaching and they had great defense. And then Game 2 and Game 3 of the season so far, that's when the 3-point shooting starts to get going. And not only the 3-point shooting starts to get going, but LeBron James starts to play better basketball. And then this Lakers team looks even better than they looked before. Beating the Suns Friday night, then beating the Kings the next night on a back-to-back, and LeBron looks unstoppable with a 30-point triple-double. So the Lakers have looked really good, and there have been times where they haven't looked good and still won. So the Lakers have been impressive so far. At 2, I have the Oklahoma City Thunder. I wanted to put them at 1, but I think we all know who's going to be number 1. Thunder 3-0. I think they played great basketball start of the year. Beat Denver. You beat Chicago. You beat Atlanta. OKC's looked really good. Just not better than number 1, and that's the Boston Celtics. Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown have been on a tear. I've never seen a team that's won a championship have 2 NBA stars that are trying to prove something. It's unbelievable. NBA champions should not have to prove something, but Jaylen Brown is trying to prove that he should have been on the Team USA team, and Jason Tatum is trying to prove that he should have got minutes on that team. So, I guess Steve Kerr and Team USA are the reason why Boston Celtics, are on a tear to start the year, and they might continue to do this. Let me know your thoughts on my NBA power rankings in the comment section, and peace out.